Welcome back, family. We just love being here. This is so fun. Heather's obviously with us again.
Hello.
This week, we're going to talk about something totally different. So we're going to talk about stress and how stress physically affects pain inside of your body. So we'll talk a little bit of neurology, but I really want to talk about what I want to start with is just a crazy story. And as you and I were having a conversation, it brought us back to almost 5.5 years ago when Coco was born.
Woo.
And I would love for you to start it off with the story. So I'll kind of cue it up with, needless to say, we had a few challenges.
When she was born?
When Coco was born.
Start off by saying I had an amazing birth.
Yeah, epic birth.
Yeah.
Home birth.
The birth itself was
Tess was amazing.
so special.
Mimi was amazing.
Yes.
Tess's assistant. Yeah. It was like
we had a wonderful team.
Cool thing ever.
You were tired, but it was all about you at that time.
The best part about all of it, the thing I remember the most is like I literally woke up my normal, I think it was probably 4 a.m. and then at like 4:45, I'm like, hey, are you good? And you're like, I think I'm feeling something, but you can go surfing. So I go surfing at 4:45, come back home, and you're like, I think I'm feeling something still, like something's happening.
Yeah.
And then
I asked you to go to the grocery.
You're like, can you go to the grocery just to like be prepared? But the baby's not coming yet, so we're good. So that was on a Tuesday.
Yep. So we start late.
Yeah, we start late in the office on Tuesdays, so we don't come in until like 2. And so you're like, I think something's happening, but you're probably going to be able to go to the office.
You'll be fine. The whole day.
It'll be all good. Afternoon. So go get groceries, and then I come home, and there's like a little bit more intensity. And
you can go for the first few hours.
You're like, for like, you're probably going to have to close down like the last half of the afternoon, but the first half of the afternoon will be good. And I can't remember if I like went to work out or what I went to do.
Sitting on the ball.
And then I come home and you're on the ball bouncing and you're like, call Monica, close the whole schedule. You're not going to the office. And then that's when we knew Coco was coming.
She was coming.
Yeah, which is cool. So, but the reason that I bring that story up is because it has a direct correlation to not the birth process necessarily, but
the
what
postpartum
happened
process for us.
Right after postpartum with how the body can store specific pain patterns.
Right.
And how thoughts that we think and emotional stress can literally create specific conditions within the body that can cause pain, that can cause a whole bunch of other issues. I would argue almost any symptom that someone could deal with. And I think it's important for people to understand this because 90% I think of what we see in our practice is that most people come in and they're like, well, I was just getting my groceries out of the car. Or I did too many deadlifts at the gym.
Yeah.
And
I bent down to brush my teeth.
Yeah, I was like bending over to spit in the sink after I was brushing my teeth and my back went out. Like I dropped the soap in the shower. Like I was just putting on a shoe and then all of a sudden my back locked up.
Right.
Or I don't know, maybe it was because I was doing overhead tricep presses and then my tricep or my elbow is now hurting me. Like the list could go on and on.
Right.
I think I wore heels. That's why my ankle hurts because I had this
always something
cocktail. Yeah, so we always link up. I think like by nature. And I think we've been trained this way through TV and probably a lot of how we were raised.
Western medicine,
is that if you have symptoms, then like something happened to cause those, and we just need to correct the symptoms.
Because there's no other way that it could be a reason.
Yeah, there's no other way that it could exist. But what we know and what we've known for a long time now is that stress, like mental stress specifically, can create a host of symptoms within the body. So what the heck does this have to do with Coco and your birth? So I would love for you to tell the story of just kind of what happened, because one of the things I love about practicing, and I really hope that more people start to do this because I see a lot of people who struggle with it, is that they can't take time off to be with their families when they have kiddos, especially chiropractors where they're like, I have to show up, people are going to cancel, I need income coming in. And I think it's just sad to me. But anyway, not to be like judgmental about it, I would love for you to just share the story because I think it kind of highlights. We took a full 2 weeks off. I took a full 2 weeks off from the practice.
And the cool part about that is every single client at the time was so happy for you taking the time off. They were just like family. They understood.
Yeah.
And they appreciated it because they would want the same thing for their family.
Yeah, so you can build a practice where people just love you and love when you take time off.
For sure.
And don't get mad
Don't
about
complain like, oh, you were gone for 2 weeks rolling around in the sand.
So anyway, neither here nor there. I would love for you to tell the story of like what happened with Coco. Tell the story. give all the details and
I'll
all the
do my best.
frustration because it was frustrating and it was super hard.
Yeah.
And I'll just interject my 2 cents
Okay.
as we go.
So start off, we hired somebody to take my place at the office.
And mind you, this is our first ever employee.
Yes, first employee ever. We were almost 2 years into practice.
Yep.
So I was pretty much doing everything. You were doing everything. I was doing all the back end office manager kind of stuff. Anything that you couldn't do outside of adjusting. So we hire this person to take my place when Coco was born because I didn't know what my plan was. I didn't know if I wanted to return back to the office or what. So she came on full time for the office. We trained her up. She was all ready to go, super excited to be a part of the team. We were excited to have her. Coco was born. Everything is so great with the birth and the first week postpartum, nursing fine. She was a big baby, like over 9 pounds. So she was hungry all the time. But all that normal and natural. And you come home exactly 7 days after she was born. You come home from having a conversation on the phone with the employee that we hired, and you say, I have something to tell you. And I was like, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, hang on, don't tell that yet. So like basically what happened is, so the first week we were all good. So we're trying, and like anybody who has kids, they know it's just a process to figure out like what is
the
like
new routine.
I'm just trying to figure out like am I sleeping?
Right.
Am I not? Like, do we sleep with the baby in the bed with us? Do we sleep like do we put her in a bassinet? Do we like how do we breastfeed? How does this thing work? Like is her lip in the right position? Is she not getting enough milk? Is she like there's so much to figure out when you have your first kid.
Yes.
And it's like confusing and stressful, and then there's lack of sleep on top of that, plus you have no idea what you're doing, and there's no handbook to really prepare you for it.
100%.
And we have no family here to support us as well, although
Right.
we actually chose that kind of on our own. But I came to the office to like, I can't remember what it was, maybe like scan some papers or put some documents in the computer. I don't remember what, but you guys were napping and I was like, I've come to the office. And so this is like 7 days into my full 2 weeks off.
Right.
And I come to the office, I have a phone call. Actually, I had a text message. And the text message was from this employee that we hired.
Right.
And she was like, hey, can we chat? And I just had the, when you have the feeling, you're like, this is not going to go
gut
well.
feeling.
Wes, don't ever do this to me. And she is like, hey, can we chat? And I'm like, I'm totally kidding, by the way. She's like, can we chat? And I just ask, I'm like, is it bad?
Right.
And she said, no, not at all.
Yes.
And so I come home and the news was, you can share, you can keep going. Sorry I interrupted.
Yes. So the news was, so keep in mind, I was nursing Coco right when you came home and you immediately came up to me and wanted to talk. And so I'm nursing Coco, literally having no issues up to this point. You tell me that she has decided to put in her notice and
quit.
To quit, yeah.
Because she found a new job.
Yes, yeah, which is great, so not great for us at the time.
I had like 7 days to figure out how I'm going to run the office by myself with you and our brand new baby at home.
Yeah, that was, as soon as you told me the news, I literally broke down and I was bawling my eyes out. Completely like in awe because of the situation, like so stressed out that something like that could be put on us when we have zero support in here. Like you said, like we chose that. And at the same time, it's like one of the most challenging things you could ever experience, I think. Running a business by yourself with just you two, and then the one person that you thought you could rely on for extra support, created new plans, which, is wonderful for her. And at the time for us, I felt very hurt. And it wasn't about me, but that's how I took it at the time.
Yeah.
So I was creating a lot of fear and anxiety and stress at the time.
What were you think? Like, what was going through your head? So like I just told you, like, hey, she's no longer going to be with us. She put in her 2 weeks. So in my head, I'm like, we're basically screwed.
Yeah. Yes, I didn't know how we were going to do it.
I'm going to be running the office and answering the phones and adjusting people at the same time while you're at home with Coco.
Or I expected to have to go back to the office with Coco at 2 weeks old and try and figure out that. So yeah, it was just so much fear. Like, how is this going to work out? How are we going to be able to create the client experience that we have trusted ourselves to create up until that point and for the future? And it was just going to be so challenging for you to stay as present as you wanted to be and be able to take the time to spend time with both of us, and for you to be able to take the time to spend quality one-on time with Coco. Like, in my mind, it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
I was already freaking out about the fact that I would have to go back to the office. You would have to do everything on your own. And it was, just extremely stressful. So, as I mentioned, I was nursing while he was telling me this information, as I'm sobbing and creating that stress response in my system. So like 3 days later, our midwife comes back to do a normal home check and weighs Coco. And she's like, Coco's lost a lot of weight. She had lost like almost 2 pounds or something.
And she should have gained her birth weight back.
Yeah, she should have been. Yes, exactly. So by that point, typically, it's normal to lose a little bit of weight the first week, but by, the time that she had returned, she should be back to normal weight, birth weight, if not a little bit over. And Coco had lost a significant amount of weight. The crazy part is that we were nursing like every hour almost, because she was just extremely fussy. I just thought she was a really hungry baby, but little did I know that I was not producing enough milk for her at the time. So,
and there's an important part of this that I think people have to get, is not only were you not producing enough milk, but most of your milk was not being produced on the side
that I was nursing on when Daniel told me the information.
Crucial.
Yes.
Understanding.
Yeah, because up until that point, she was totally fine.
Yeah.
So the specific side that she was nursing on when you told me the information that created the stress response where I was sobbing like crazy and all this fear and stress came into my body, was the specific side that wasn't creating anything anymore as far as milk for her.
Yeah.
So we had to go through this crazy process of trying to increase my supply.
This was the hardest time I've probably ever experienced in my life. Like, harder than business, so you have, for me, I had a wife who like has no idea what's going on with her body, and is just like almost feeling beaten up. One, because we have somebody who we like trusted, where we kind of felt like she betrayed us, even though she didn't. She was doing what was best for her.
Yes.
But it was so hard to have those feelings, especially when she's like, no, it's not bad.
Right.
And I'm like, well, it's not bad for you.
Yeah.
But it's like terrible for us. Selfish, I know. And that's something I like have had to work on. But the other part I think is like all of the things that we had to do. So like there's this, you're obviously like, why won't my body produce enough milk? Then we're like, okay, is our daughter going to be okay? Because then is she getting enough milk? And then the question comes up of like, do we give her formula, which we were pretty much fully against? Do we make our own formula with like raw milk, and what does that look like? And when am I going to have the time from like being in the office to be able to make it, since you're with Coco?
Right.
So there's like all this stress. And then on top of that, we have like, do you want me to tell this part of the story? Sure. So we're doing like literally weighted feeds with Coco. So what a weighted feed is, if you don't know, this is insane. So they have you, and like, we had to figure out what the issue was. If it was just that Coco wasn't drinking enough,
if her latch wasn't good,
or if you weren't producing enough, or whatever the deal was. So what they do is they have you do what's called a weighted feed. So a weighted feed is basically every time Coco's going to nurse, you take off all her clothes down to no diaper. And we're talking about a less than 2-week-old baby that we're doing this to. So,
and it's winter time.
So down to no diaper, you put her on this hard plastic scale, you weigh her, then you got to take her, nurse her,
on both sides,
breastfeed her both sides, then weigh her again to see how much weight she gained from how much milk she drank.
There was a certain amount that she had to gain.
And then anything that was under 3 ounces, we had to make up with like donor breast milk, basically. And so then you're bottle feeding her.
Yes.
And then they wanted you to...
I had to pump immediately after.
Pump for like 30 minutes after. So you got to think like every 2 hours, an hour and a half of you is...
working.
Yes. And pump. And so like you're getting, every 2 hours, you're getting 30 minutes of sleep all day long. Like 24/7, no breaks from that. Coco's the same. You're
she was
upset.
So exhausted.
You're exhausted.
Right.
She's exhausted.
We all were.
Our poor girl.
Yeah.
And so finally we're just like, okay, we're done with all of this. We're just going to do donor milk exclusively. Not exclusively,
No.
but we would just make it up.
You're right.
And everything ended up working out fine. So we didn't die. Our business didn't
She's still
collapse.
very healthy. Yes. Yes,
We
yeah.
did it. We figured it all out. But I think, did we miss any parts that we should share?
No.
All that makes sense to you guys? Yeah? Danielle? Yeah? So I guess like the transition then is to just ask the question of like, why did that happen?
Right.
Right. So it doesn't, again, like we mentioned in the beginning, it doesn't matter if it's back pain or if it was an elbow issue or a headache or digestive issues
Yes.
or skin issues or loss of breast milk on one side specifically
Right.
and the body not being able to produce enough. The question becomes like, why would that happen? And the answer is stress. And so I think what people miss oftentimes is that our mental stress and the thoughts that we think are ultimately what keep us trapped. And I mean, I would almost say like a slave. Like we're kind of a slave to our stress hormones. Our bodies were designed to have a very specific neurophysiological response based on stress, because stress is ultimately like in those moments of stress, if we have a bear or a lion or a saber-tooth tiger attacking us,
Yeah.
it is of utmost importance that we survive, because that's how we reproduce and that's how we maintain the human species here.
Yeah.
The problem is that we've evolved so quickly in terms of technology, but our bodies still have the same stress responses
Right.
that God gave us to keep us safe and protected if we were cavemen and women. So what, like literally the physical stress response is very, very simple. It's that cortisol for you in your scenario, and we can talk about another one here in just a second. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and that stress hormone literally stops the body from producing oxytocin. And oxytocin is required for milk letdown. So to be able to release milk. So if we think about like, okay, why would then in your scenario, milk production drop on your, I can't remember which
Left.
side was it, your left side.
Yes.
Why would milk production drop on the left side right after this huge stress of like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with business? I'm going to have to go back to the office with a brand newborn baby and like be running the office and doing this thing. And we don't have anything figured out and we have no idea what's up.
Yeah.
And so, the answer is pretty simple, is that release of stress hormone cortisol from a mental stress, not a bear attacking us in the woods,
Right.
triggered your body, to stop producing oxytocin. But the other thing too is that stress hormones also affect our body's ability to produce what is called prolactin. And prolactin is what actually allows our bodies to make milk in the first place in women. And so we kind of have this twofold approach where it's like the physiology explains how the mental stress would show up as a specific symptom.
Right.
In your case, the symptom was a mental stress of like, oh my gosh, this person did this thing to us, and then what are we going to do?
Right.
Fear of the future.
Yes.
And that fear messed up the system. But it's not because you were messed up. It's because this is how our bodies were designed
It's a normal response.
as a normal response to an abnormal amount of stress, which we were already under an abnormal amount of stress. We had a new kid.
Right. We
We were
own
running our own
business.
business.
Yes.
That was like 2 years to have a business is like, anybody who says that's not infancy is just crazy.
Right.
Because it is. Yeah, so that's kind of like the physiology, right? So I mentioned stress impacting oxytocin, cortisol decreases prolactin, and then like, I guess circling, is there anything you would add?
I don't think so.
All good?
Yeah.
So to circle back then, I think it would be important to go back and be like, okay, that's cool for like a stress that's like breastfeeding, where we can make a direct correlation between how milk production is affected by
Right.
prolactin and cortisol and oxytocin and
Yeah.
those imbalances that happen within the body. But I think it's a better question to ask and just to consider of like, what about all those people that we mentioned in the beginning when someone says like, I was just getting my groceries out of the car and my back went out or
Tying
my
my
back froze
shoe,
up.
all that
Tying my
stuff. Okay.
shoe. It had to be because I did a whole bunch of deadlifts in the gym yesterday.
Yes.
And the reality is like 90% of the time that's not necessarily true. So in our office, we literally see this time and time again, where every time when someone comes in with something where they're like, hey, this just popped up, I ask them, are you under any other stress? And it becomes like, sometimes people laugh where they're just like, I know what you're going to ask me. Am I under any stress? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yeah. That they are. Whether it's like, oh, I'm moving. Right? I'm in the middle of moving right now. No wonder my neck is so jacked up.
For sure.
And I'm like, yeah, it's not your pillow. It's not your bed that you had in the same house that you were sleeping in before. It's the move and the stress of the move. And not because you're moving anything, because you hired people to, like, movers to help you. But your neck locked up because of stress, because moving is a stress.
Right.
I could use tons of examples of this, but one of the examples I would share from my life is around the same time. It was just a little bit after. So I think Coco was like 4 or 5 months old when she was having her sleep issues.
Oh, yes.
Transitioning out of our bed into her own bed for the first time. Is that I remember I was doing a CrossFit workout, and what I felt like I ripped my pec on my left side. So it was just this wicked shoulder issue on my left side.
Right.
And again, like, I'm the doctor who teaches people at this every day, and yet and still I'm sometimes the worst student.
100%.
To be like, no, it was because I was doing muscle ups and I was doing ring dips, and like that's why my pec messed up. But the reality is that shoulders are associated with joy, and that was a time in life when I was like not happy.
I don't think either of us were.
It was super hard. Like we were literally sleeping in separate rooms.
Right. It's supposed to be like the happiest time of your life, and yet we were not joyful in any capacity.
Yeah, because we had a little munchkin who was not sleeping well,
right,
to say the least.
Which was normal.
But I was like, what were the options? I had to sleep. And so I'm
to go to the office.
Yeah,
yes.
And the reason that I valued sleep so much, like I could have slept in the same room as you guys, but the reason I wanted to sleep and I valued the sleep is because we know that sleep wrecks our ability to make decisions and think.
Yes.
So we're like, all right, this is the option. I'm gonna sleep in a different room. This is like 4 weeks that I did it. I literally slept in our guest bedroom, and it wasn't easy, but it was the only thing that made sense so that we could both operate at some level of like more performance than not.
And to allow for you to be present for every client that you were coming in contact with. I think that was like the biggest thing for us, is like the care that you were providing at the time. We wanted to make sure that you were as optimal as possible.
Yeah. So serving and the decisions we make and the stress that we have or don't have, a big part of, like, I would argue this number one most important thing obviously would be brain-based care.
Right.
But then beyond that, like sleep, prayer, meditation are going to be the number 2 things that anybody could possibly do to allow themselves to function at the highest level possible.
Absolutely.
Sleep is when we can create our connections for what we learned in a day. Sleep is where our body restores itself. I go on and on about that, but this episode is not necessarily about sleep. So the stress. So then the question is like, all right, well, how does that shoulder issue or that back issue or getting the groceries out of the car, or I was just doing this hard CrossFit workout, how does that correlate to the same thing that we're talking about with Coco's birth?
Right.
And having this employee quit kind of out of the blue on us. And so the answer to that is that it's so interesting that one of the things that happens in a stress response is our body actually starts taking protein. So this would be like connective tissue, like our ligaments and tendons.
Okay.
And our muscles as well. And it starts to break them down.
When we're stressed.
Okay. The question would be why. And so we break them down into amino acids again, because those amino acids could then be broken up into glucose, which gets used for energy to fight or run away. Those amino acids can also get used, they get turned into inflammatory markers within the body, so that if we got cut open, think fight or flight, if a bear is going to attack me and I get cut open, I have inflammation and protective things in my body to go to that site of the wound and be able to heal it more quickly.
Okay.
So long term, if we have stress in the system, so we have this stress of Coco being born,
right,
and then we have the stress of drop milk supply and where we're going to find milk and how are we going to even run the business and how are we going to do all these things, and then I'm not sleeping well, and like all the stuff that new parents experience. And realize that my shoulder injury had literally zero to do with the fact that I was doing that workout. It had everything to do with that the conditions within my body were presenting in a way to change what was happening with protein synthesis in the muscle tissue and preparing me for a fight or flight response, which ultimately like allowed me to my body susceptible to an injury in the first place.
Okay.
And so the pain was put there as a way for my brain to say like, hey, you have too much going on mentally right now. I need you to stop. And so there's this twofold approach of like, we start to break down connective tissue and the front part of the brain, which is the part of the brain that's turned off by stress hormones, sends a pain signal, and it actually turns up the pain signal. And pain is only there to get us to pay attention and ultimately to get us to stop.
So tell me more about, like, if somebody was taking amino acids, why that wouldn't be helpful in this situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so funny. Mark asked me the same thing last night, like just a genuine, he wanted to know question. So when our bodies go into, so remember there's two branches of the nervous system. There's the rest and digest branch, which is the healing branch. That's the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. And then there's the stress branch, which is the fight or flight branch.
Right.
So we can't be in both at the same time. So the key word on the parasympathetic side, it's called rest and digest for a very specific reason, because it has to do with the digestive process in the body. And so in parasympathetic state, our body is going to actually push more blood into the digestive system, into the small intestines, into the large intestines, into the stomach, into the pancreas, to get our body to digest and absorb nutrients better. If we're fighting or running, and that process, the digestive process in our bodies, takes about 20% of our body's entire blood flow. So if we were going to fight or run away from a bear, if we have stress, it only makes sense that God would design our bodies to say, hey, why don't we pull out that 20% of blood flow to the gut that we're using, and let's divert it into the big muscles so we have oxygen and energy to fight or run away.
Okay.
So that's great if we're cavemen and women.
Right.
But when we have months and months of stress like you and I did, and we push out blood consistently day in, day out from the digestive system into other parts of the body to prep us to fight or run away, our body's not going to absorb those nutrients from the supplements as well as it could. Or even absorb, like if you're I see people all the time who are like, hey, I'm eating clean, I'm taking my supplements, I'm working out.
Right.
And I'm like, that's great, but if your brain's still stuck in a stressed out state, then your body is still breaking down protein connective tissue.
Yes.
Your body is still stuck in a fight or flight state, not in a rest and keyword digest state. And so the reason that the supplements don't always work is because we're looking for a Band-Aid approach to something that will actually address the cause, which is, in my opinion, in the world that we operate in, the nervous system.
Right. So you can take all the supplements in the world, but if you're still stressed, or your brain is still stuck in stress, the nutrients isn't going to be absorbed, and you're essentially just like flushing money down the toilet.
And I've worked with clients who, one of them I can think of, you probably remember, worst case of eczema I've ever seen. They were legitimately, she was on, and she's like 8-9 years old at the time, thousands of dollars of supplements a month.
Yes.
Every month. And mom's like, I just can't sustain this.
Right.
And she's like, can you help at all? And I'm like, I don't know, like this is pretty intense. But what I do know is the body knows how to heal itself. And what I do know is that there's a very specific physiology that happens internally when our body goes into a fight or flight state. So if we can get her out of that, her body should resolve its skin issues on its own. That's like the best answer I have. And she's like, well, nobody's ever told me that before, so like, let's try it. And in 3 months' time, we have pictures of like her body completely clear, no eczema, and no supplements. She never needed them in the first place.
And you would say that the eczema was a response to the stress that was on in her system.
Yeah. So I don't want to give away the details of that specific client, because there are probably people who would know who we were talking about.
Yeah.
However, what I can say is that she had a lot of trauma as a kid. And that trauma in the body was a mental stress to her long before she probably even knew it was a mental stress.
Right.
And like something that no 5-year-old child should go through ever, or have to go through. And unfortunately it does happen. But what happened to her, and nothing physically happened to her, by the way. So like, don't think them negative like that. But what happened to her caused her body to be in such a fight or flight state and pull so much blood from the digestive system for so many years that then she starts to get leaky gut.
Yes.
And so then her body's just dumping toxins into her system. And that's where the skin issues come up.
Right.
So again, if we go back to like, all right, skin issues are a symptom. It wasn't because she was deficient in vitamins. It's because her nervous system was stuck in a fight or flight state. And that fight or flight state presented itself as eczema.
Right.
Just like your fight or flight state presented itself as decreased milk production. As my fight or flight state presented itself as a shoulder issue. all different emotions. I can share, there's a bunch of these, but like shoulders are associated with joy. So of course I wouldn't feel a lot of joy in life if I'm exhausted, number one. I don't get to sleep next to my wife and my daughter. Just this like feeling of, I don't want to say isolation necessarily, but it wasn't the easiest time to be like, man, I'm married and I'm literally living life in like a separate bedroom by myself so we can figure out the sleep thing with Coco.
Yeah. Yes.
Not a joyful time in life. And shoulders show up as joy. And so it's no wonder that I had that issue.
Right.
And it's so cool because for everything, whether it's low back or knees or ankles or hips or skin issues or cancer, like there's an emotional state that's represented with all of them. And 95% of what we see in our practice is that the emotions will drive the symptoms because the emotional stress is what is actually triggering the physiology to cause the pain or the symptoms in the first place.
Yeah. And can that happen as far as like, say, for instance, in the office with a client and you go to address what they have going on, talking about, oh, my low back, et cetera, like we were talking about, and you bring that to their attention, how quickly can that change?
Oh, like instantly. One of my favorite stories, so we take care of a hairstylist. I'm sure she wouldn't care if I shared her name, but I won't. We have been working with her for a long time and we've had many of these conversations, and she's actually, what's cool is she's been with us through the transition. So there was a time in practice when I didn't even know this like emotional thing existed, right? And that it could trigger pain and stress and whatever. So what's cool is like, as we start working with her, where we got her to is this thought process that like, oh my gosh, the reason that my shoulder blade hurts so bad is because I have like 3 or 4 clients who literally just complain so much and they're so negative when I'm doing their hair.
Yes.
That is stressing me out. And I'm like, I see them on the schedule and I dread the day. And I'm like, that's not necessarily a way to live.
Right.
And
who wants to go to work like that?
Yeah, nobody wants to go to work and like deal with somebody like that. And so that's why we love our clients so much.
Yes.
And so for her, like what's cool is she'll literally go, hey, my shoulder's bugging me a little bit more today, like before she gets adjusted. And she'll be like, but I had this person who like, they dumped all their stuff on me yesterday and they were just complaining.
She already
and
knows.
she's like, and then she'll come back the next week and I'm like, hey, tell me what's up with that shoulder. And she's like, yeah, completely good now.
Yes.
Because she can get herself out of the mental loop of stress or subconscious stress that is just a thought process.
Can you talk about the client that came into the office last week and already knew exactly what you were going to say to her?
Tell me more.
When Megan came in to the office, she literally walks in the door and first off, she called Danielle and it's like, can I come into the office? I'm experiencing pain in like my jaw. And then she literally walks in the door and goes, I already know. Dr. Daniel's going to tell me I am holding on to all this anger and aggression.
Yes.
And she's like, I already know what it's contributing to. And she just starts literally talking like you. Yes. She knew exactly what you were going to say to her, the emotional correlation to the pain that she was experiencing. She's like, I'm already bringing it to my realization. She's like, I know that I need to get adjusted to get out of stress. And I mean, you can go on with it, but it was just so amazing that she already knew what was happening in her body because she had learned from being under care with us for so long the emotional stress that can take a toll on the body and the correlation to the pain in the body.
Yeah. So I didn't know exactly who you were talking about, but now I know full on. So yeah, that's what's the coolest part I think is like when you have the awareness that your subconscious is usually the subconscious thoughts that we have about life and the circumstances that happen to us in life.
Yes.
And these can come from when we were kids, by the way. So these could be agreements that we made. Like for me, I'll tell you a big one for me is like, I don't need anybody. Like I can do it all on my own and I'm good. And I got that from a specific place. We won't talk about that trauma on this episode.
Right.
But I can like pinpoint times in my life when I was taught that from my parents. And not even that they were teaching me it, but the way that in which they were interacting with the world taught me that that's how I should be, is not trusting of other people. And so here's like literally she comes in and she's like, what's the emotions for jaw? And so I tell her it's like anger, rage, resentment. Yes. And she's like, explains it perfectly.
She already knew.
Because so like though anger, rage, resentment is a specific energy level that
Yes.
triggers a specific physiology, which is the stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, which increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, increases blood sugar levels, increases cholesterol levels, increases insulin resistance, increases our body's blood clotting factors, it increases our fear, anxiety, depression, it increases muscle tension, it decreases bone growth, it decreases growth hormone and testosterone. The list could go on and on and
Right.
on. And so when like she comes in and she has this realization, now we're changing, like she's changing her own thought patterns about her life. And
The
she's realizing
subconscious.
that there's not something wrong with me.
Right.
Which is also, if you think that there's something wrong with you and you're broken,
Oh.
that's going to trigger a stress response. That's
Yes.
a negative thought pattern.
How many people do you think really feel that way?
That something's wrong with them.
Yes. That they're broken.
I think most people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of times I have to lovingly help people get to the place where I'm like, if you could just not come in and lay down and be like, my back is jacked up today.
They identify with that.
Yeah.
That's they turn that into their identity. Yes.
Yep. And it's literally making an agreement of like, yeah, I am broken.
Yeah.
And my body is not worthy and it's
Right.
messed up and there's something wrong with it. And when we think that way, that's what happens. Like I shared this, I don't remember if I shared it on the last episode, but the guy who took the medication to kill himself and then
I don't think you shared that.
so this dude, like I can't remember what happened or the whole story with him, but there was a guy who took this medication to kill himself, but he was part of a study. So when he goes into the hospital, the ER,
Okay.
the doctors are like, we got to figure out what medication he took. Well, they don't know because he's on this double-blind placebo study.
Oh, okay.
So then they're like, and this dude's on death's door, right? Like he's deathbed. And the doctors find out that he's taking the sugar pill. He's not even taking the actual medication.
Whoa.
And so that's how powerful our brains are, that if we believe that something can kill us, it will kill us. If we believe that something is scary,
Yeah.
if we believe that something is wrong, our physiology, our literal stress hormones and what happens in our brain will organize itself around that principle to protect us and say, I just need you to not die. And so all of his vital stuff shuts down because his body's going, we're going to die. I'm going to do everything I can to just keep you alive, not thrive. And that's the whole point of the care that we get to provide.
Right.
Is we get to adjust people. We get to wake up the brain so that people can actually thrive. The way God designed the body was to be in a
Yes.
healing state.
Yeah.
God also designed us to have these stress hormones to keep our bodies safe and protected. And if we don't, like when people miss that we're this idea that we're not broken,
Right.
like I feel like they just completely miss the boat.
For sure.
Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful.
What do you guys think? So like the most practical thing, is like getting adjusted. It has to be. You have to have brain-based care.
Yeah. It's very specific adjustments.
Yes.
By the way, it's
Yeah. And like I don't want to go too much into that on
Right.
the episode of like
Understandable.
how that works, and that's why someone like our client, when she was talking about the person with the jaw, she can come in and she knows in her head that like, okay, my stress and what happened in my life over the weekend is what's triggering all of this. Like I'm keenly aware of it. The harder part though is to actually get that process to stop, like to not think about it as a negative thing, right? And this is part of why I say like, you know, we talk about the Bible and the Bible says like, do not fear, like meditate on my word day and night and like think about the promises that God made to us. So the most practical thing I think is we have to wake up the brain, because when we wake up the brain says, I don't need to fight or run away right now. We can go back into safety. We can restore blood flow to the digestive system. We can allow the activation of sex hormones. We can increase our body's oxytocin, which is really connection to other people. It's so interesting. Oxytocin is responsible for so many things, but like, check this out. Oxytocin is the thing, like when you have a deep connection with someone else, you know, like you just got married, so you know what's up. Like, you know that connection that you feel, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is my dude. Like I love you so much.
This is my person.
Like how I feel about Heather, like how much I love every day. I'm like, oh, Coco, I just love you so much, like so much. I can't even take it. And I
true.
tell her all the time, but that feeling is oxytocin. That's all it is. So it's connection to other people. Why wouldn't we want that feeling in fight or flight. Because if a bear is going to attack us,
Right.
we don't need that warm and fuzzy. We need the opposite of like, hey, I'm literally going to kill you or I'm going to run away from you.
Yes.
We want no connection, no empathy, no warmth, no none of it.
Just get out of there.
Yeah. So practical, wake up the brain. The other practical things, though, I think, and this is something that I'm really trying to work through. So I'm not great at this because I feel like these last 4 or 5 days, man, Danielle could attest to this, is like, I just, as much as I'm trying, I just feel like my whole world is like crumbling. Where I'm like, everything's going to fail and everything sucks and I'm not happy and I'm not good enough to do any of this. And like literally just the dumbest thoughts of like, Wes doesn't like being here and Nadej is going to quit tomorrow and Danielle's like got another job lined up and like I have all
this
these
fear.
Stupid, crazy, fearful
Yes.
thoughts.
Yes.
Which is no wonder why I can't sleep
Right.
because stress hormones, subconscious stress triggers
Right.
anxiety and alertness to look for the next scary thing. So my sleep's been worse
Right.
and I could show you on my Whoop like that you can literally see that my
Oh,
sleep's
no,
been
I know.
more negative.
I know.
Of course you do. So, and there's someone coughing, keeping me up at night. So anyway, I share that to
addition
say
to your
like
snoring.
being aware of the thoughts that we think, but then also looking at those thoughts and being like, okay, how is this a good thing? Or the question I've been asking is like, God, what are you trying to show me?
Yeah.
Like, where are you trying to show me that I need work? Like, are you trying to show me that I'm idolizing money or that I'm idolizing like people in my life?
Yeah. Well, this is also where like meditation and prayer comes in as like the next best option under brain-based care as far as like being able to adapt to the stress.
Yeah.
Just placing yourself in that least stressed mental state, because you had said mentally and emotionally, that's what controls that physiology. And if you can allow your body to get in a more restful state with that, more grateful state, more joyful state, more peaceful state, which is exactly where the front part of the brain comes in as well. We know that with the specific adjustments. And so if you can place yourself in that position, it's going to automatically reduce your stress in the system as well.
Yeah. So anything that I guess the most practical advice I could give is that anything that activates the prefrontal cortex is going to be better and advantageous to shut off stress hormones.
Right.
And so prayer is going to be huge. Like optimism and hope and faith comes from the front part of the brain.
Right.
So, like I said, for me, the game is figuring out what am I trying to be shown? How is this a win? And when you realize that like you're probably actually not going to die, that life is probably going to be okay and work itself out, like it has at every instance in my life ever. And I've been in some pretty dark places with like dark people and darkness,
Yes.
and I've made it through. And I think most people have, unless they just choose a different way. So I think piece of it is for me now looking back and just going like, okay, it didn't all crumble down there. It didn't crumble down 2 years ago not 2 years ago, but 2 years into practice.
Oh yeah. When Coco, yeah.
We had no idea how we were going to run this thing with just me.
Yeah.
It probably isn't going to crumble when I have an amazing team.
Right.
Who I think probably believes in me more than I do most days. And so an amazing wife who definitely believes in me and like prays for me every single day. So I think that's a big piece of it, is just realizing like, yeah, you're not going to fail. And if you do, it's a learning experience.
Right.
It's going to turn out to be a good thing.
Always.
And then you can look back and be like, okay, that's awesome. Like, what did we learn from all the stress with Coco? So many things. It brought us closer together in a lot of ways.
Yes.
It made me realize something. This is probably one of the biggest wins that people don't know, is like, I learned that postpartum depression and the things that come with it are actually real. And
Oh,
people
yeah.
I was serving, I'm like, before that, I didn't have any, like, I had no understanding for what that meant. I'm just like, yeah, your hormones are rebalancing, but like, no, postpartum depression is real.
I legit experienced postpartum rage and aggression and
Yeah.
depression and anxiety. Like, it was a real thing.
Yeah. And so, that lesson, that experience taught me that. And I can look back on it now and be like, okay, it's a good thing. So just looking back on the past fears and or worries or places where you feel like you're going to fail,
Yes.
and reframing those to be like, all right, what I learned, what was my lesson from this? What was I trying to be shown from this? Another practical thing is like literally just moving. So I don't think a lot of people know this or understand, but like everybody talks about working out. And if we're getting like too far off of the like stress emotions thing, just bring me back. But like everybody's like, what workout should I do? What workout should I do? And like the best workout that you could possibly do is walk. I just saw somebody post on a Facebook page today. They were like, hey, I have osteoporosis. I'm super young. What can I do? And like everybody's listing all these supplements you can take. And I'm like, that weight-bearing exercise is the number one thing you can do to strengthen your bones. Because if you put weight on your bones, your body is going to naturally respond with building them up stronger.
Right.
Which is why people who are obese very rarely get osteoporosis.
Right.
Because they carry more weight, so their bones are carrying more pressure, which they have to be denser in order to carry it in the first place.
Makes sense.
Physics. It's crazy. It sounds like so simple, but that's how the body's organized. So walking, for a number of reasons, but I'll just say, like, just to talk about the frontal cortex, when we're walking outdoors, you have so many things. So you're out in like clean air.
Yes.
You're usually getting sunlight in your eyes, which is arguably beneficial. Great. I would take off the sunglasses if you're wearing sunglasses.
Yes.
You're getting sunlight on your skin. And then the coolest part is that activation of the frontal cortex. So movement, like driving your legs off of the ground, not off of a treadmill,
Okay.
is one of the biggest ways that your brain gets stimulation in exercise.
Why not a treadmill?
Because on a treadmill, the mat moves under you, so you tend to do more hip flexion versus like literally driving your legs to propel yourself forward off of the ground.
Yeah.
So the other benefit, so that's one. What's also interesting is that drive of the legs actually allows your body to use protein more effectively and break down amino acids and build up muscle. So if you want to talk about, like, most people are just doing like biceps, upper body stuff. They don't focus on their legs, but drive of the legs is actually what allows our bodies to use more protein and build up more muscle, and it boosts testosterone as well. So only of the legs. The other thing, this is the most important thing. When we get outside and we walk, the things that are passing by you on both sides of your eyes is very stimulating to the frontal cortex.
Oh, tell us more about that.
And so, I mean, there's not much more to tell except for like that your eye movements and the way that you're tracking and the way that you're looking at things and the way that your brain is scanning its environment is very stimulating to the frontal cortex. And then we can go, like, if you want to add another layer to it, I tell people this a lot. I'm like, hey, why don't you just walk, but like walk with your spouse? So now, remember, frontal cortex is responsible for our connection to others.
Yes.
It's responsible for turning off a pain signal. It's responsible for motivation. It's responsible for grit and willpower. It's responsible for goal setting. There's all these things it's responsible for. It's responsible for success. So if we get outside, to activate the parasympathetic system and activate the frontal cortex, constriction and dilation of the pupils, like back and forth, is really, really good for the body. So like kids in and out is really, really good for their brains. Same thing. So most of us sit inside like 90% of the day, and we go outside for like just between getting in the car and walking in the grocery store.
Less than 10 minutes a day, a lot of people.
Yeah, so like getting outside changes the way our pupils dilate and constrict. So that's stimulating to the brain. And then we also have this, if you're walking with someone and you're with, like, if you and I went for a walk together, usually we're going to be forced to talk. Unless Coco's with us, and then I'm sprinting with Coco and you're walking
by myself
because Coco's so fast and amazing. So like, I just share that because there's so many things that you can do. So now we're driving our legs, we're boosting our body's ability to use protein, we're increasing testosterone, which is going to build our body's ability to build muscle. If you know anything about muscle and everything that all the new science talks about with muscle is like, muscle is a longevity organ, is what people say. So the more we lose muscle mass at the rate of about 1% after the age of 30 for men. So every year we're losing another 1% of muscle mass unless you're actively taking steps to keep it. And so what we're finding is that muscle mass in men is a direct indicator of longevity.
Wow.
And so if our muscle mass drops as we get older, it would only make sense that if we're walking and we're boosting testosterone and we're using protein better, then our bodies are actually, it's going to contribute to longevity.
Right.
Then, So we're stimulating the frontal cortex in all these ways, to put that long story very, very short. Then we add in the connection of a partner. So now, remember what I said, front part of the brain is responsible for connection. So we're having to use cognitive executive function to walk and talk and have a conversation with somebody that we love or we care about. And so that's like another level and another layer of stimulating the brain. So now we've stacked movement plus being outside, plus the way that walking stimulates the eyes and the brain, plus a connection with a partner. And so all of those things together, it just boosts the frontal cortex in a way that like there's really not a lot of other things that can. And that's why it feels so good when you go for a walk on the beach and you're like, dude, this feels amazing.
Yes.
Or you go on a walk and you're like, even when you're tired, you're like, I just feel reinvigorated or rejuvenated after going on that walk. It's no surprise. And again, it's just physiology. Our bodies were built to move.
Wow.
Our bodies were built to move. So to circle back, like what is all, because I feel like we went way off down a rabbit hole. What does that does that make sense? Are we doing good?
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. Sometimes we just have to extract ourselves from our environments and understand a little bit of how our system works to reset it and reboot it. A perfect example of this when we talk about walking. So one of the things I learned in chiropractic school, which I thought is so cool, and then we'll like wrap up this thought, is we have these things called neuromodulators. So what neuromodulators do, they're so cool. So at the synapses, your body, your brain, your axon, or your like, we'll just say at your synapses, your neurons release these hormones, right? And there are all kinds of different hormones that are released. Sometimes it's stress hormone, sometimes it's dopamine, sometimes serotonin. It's just dependent on what the synapses are. So when the synapse releases too much of a hormone, neuromodulators will travel down the neuron. It will pick these up and carry them back to where it gets released so they can reuse them again. But what happens is neuromodulators run out over time, or they get burnt out and they start moving really, really slow. So our reuptake of hormones or neurotransmitters becomes slower. So this is why they say humans really only have about like a 10-minute to 15-minute attention span. Moving, like stopping a task and moving, immediately re-neuromodulates your body. Like they reset themselves so they're not exhausted anymore. And so you can actually come back and focus more. So like, again, if we just talk about what does that do for the brain?
Right.
Neuromodulators are so cool because every 15 minutes you should be out like on whatever task, about every 15, some people probably more like 20, should be up and moving anyway, because it allows those neuromodulators to reset themselves so that they can do their job more efficiently.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Kind of cool. So walking achieves that. And then again, we're stimulating the part of the brain. And all of this is just in line with the way that God created our physiology. But more so, it just has to be a commitment to living in line with the way that we were created in the first place.
Yeah.
So this would be a vitalistic principle. So if the body, so vitalism means the body is self-regulating, self-maintaining, and self-healing. And like, I'll give you a perfect example. I scraped my knuckles last week, throwing something in the dumpster upstairs. It's still healing, but guess what? It's healing, and I haven't had to wake up one single time in the morning and be like, I need to make sure I heal that thing today.
Right.
My body's just doing it all the time.
Yeah.
So we have trillions of processes that happen in our bodies. Most people are making decisions that are creating more stress, that are preventing themselves from healing in the first place.
And again, it's just like stacking. on
Yeah,
top
and the
of
stress is
each
just stacking.
stress.
So we're organizing our lives around grind harder. We're organizing our lives
Hustle.
around, I don't have time to cook my meals. I'm going to eat crappy fast food. I don't have time to worry about what water I drink, so I'm just going to drink my chemical-laden fluoride water.
I don't have time to
from
work out.
the tap. I don't have time to work out, or I don't have time to drive to do that doctor's appointment. But the reality is like, you may not have the time to, but what you're losing out on from not spending that time is the energy to actually enjoy the money that you're making by hustling, and the energy that you're losing and draining that you won't be able to spend with your family because you're burnt and
Being
spent
present
and
with them.
exhausted
Yeah.
and being able to be present. And so like, I don't think, I think a lot of hardcore entrepreneurs think that it's all about money. And
Right.
I'm not saying money doesn't create some level of ease in life. But at the end of the day, like if I gave you $10 million right now today, but I said you're going to have to be in the hospital for the rest of your life, would you take it?
Absolutely not.
No, because you realize that like my energy matters more than the money that I have.
Yes.
Because if it didn't, you would just be like, yeah, I'll lay in the hospital bed with $10 million, but I won't be able to use any of it.
Yeah, what are you
except
going
on
to
my
do with
medical
that?
bills.
Right.
Great. That's awesome. The same thing is true when we talk about time. If I gave you $10 million today, but I told you you're going to die tomorrow, would you take it?
No.
No one would.
No.
Because time is more important than money. So it's prioritizing what matters.
Yes.
And defining what wealth and success is. And fear and stress and worry and going all the way back to the beginning of your story.
Yeah.
All of those things tap our energy and they end up wasting our time. And we do all of these things chasing resources, mostly money, not everyone, but mostly money, to try and fill a stress hole that we can never fill.
Yeah.
And what we really need is just to activate the front part of the brain so that we can experience all of it abundantly. We can attract more money more easily. We can feel more connected to God. We can feel more connected to our partner. We can feel more connected to our patients or our clients.
Yeah.
And we can do it with fun and the energy to do it all.
Right. That's good.
Yeah, what's up with that?
It's great. I love how you tied that in with the time and the energy and everything.
Yeah. What else? Okay. I have one last little point to just like go through. So part of this, we talked about milk supply.
Right.
We talked about my shoulder. We talked about Megan's jaw. Wes, we talked about entrepreneurs just a little bit. But I think like in general, one of the things that I think is just important to remember with all of this stuff is that the mental thought that we have will create issues in our body. They can be physical, but they can also be a number of other things. And so when we talk about disease,
Yeah.
whether it's like lack of sleep or diabetes or cancer or digestive issues or like any obesity, it doesn't matter. When we look at the physiology of what happens when we stress and when we stress mentally specifically, so just the thoughts that we think, I'll give you, this is so crazy. So think about this. Because a lot of people probably listening are sitting here going like, I'm not stressed. Like I make good money. My wife's cool. My kids are cool. I drive a cool sports car. Like it's all good. Life is great. So my question for those people would be, what did it feel like when you were standing at the altar or walking down the aisle on your wedding day?
My heart was pumping.
Heart was pumping.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that any different of a feeling than if someone cut you off in traffic? Or the feeling that you had when we found out that our employee was going to quit?
No, I mean, my heart was pumping for both.
Yeah, so heart was pumping for both.
Yeah.
The exact same. There's no difference between walking down the aisle on your wedding day and finding out this employee's leaving
Yeah.
and how are we going to do this and figure it out, or someone cutting us off in traffic, or if there was an attacker that came in here to mess us up.
Yeah.
So same three stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, they're called the catecholamines. It doesn't matter whether it's wedding day or car accident or attacker comes in here to get us. Same three stress hormones. So the reason I bring that up is because it affects life outcomes. So when we talk about disease is one, and we could look at, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. That's going to be cardiovascular disease. I won't get too much into like the rabbit hole and the weeds
Right.
of all that. But that's one piece of this, right? So when we talk about life outcomes of the stress and the thoughts that we think mentally can mess us up from a disease perspective. And we know this to be true. We talked about it last time, the
Right.
adverse childhood experience study.
Yes.
Next one, how much money we make. So I would argue that the amount of money that someone can make is dependent on how well they can solve problems for other people. And a lot of people who are entrepreneurs have like heard this before,
Sure.
right? So like, what's the level of problem that you're solving for someone else,
Right.
And we all are in our own ways. So if the front part of the brain is not able to effectively like sort through information to make a decision about how could I actually help this person, remember that fighting or running away has nothing, you don't want to help. You want to kill or get away.
Okay.
You don't want to help.
Right.
You don't want to sit around and create value. like the stress hormones literally turn off the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that would prevent us from actually being financially successful. Adverse childhood experience study says the same thing, that kids who are more stressed when they're younger
Right.
actually make less money when they are older than kids who don't have as much stress. Why? Because of the stress hormones. Again, it's just neurophysiology. It all comes back to chemicals in our system. And the coolest part about it is God gave us them.
Yes.
I got to just like keep reminding people that. I'm going to say this forever.
Yeah.
We have them to keep us safe and protected, but they don't serve us for success. And so we have to have ways to get out of it. For relationships, we talked about connection, right? And oxytocin. For the physical body, I talked about breakdown of protein and connective tissue. So that same thing is like when we look at life outcomes and what people feel like they're going to, like how their body's operating or how successful they are, or how much energy they've used or any of those things.
Yeah.
It always is all going to come down to one thing and one thing only, and that is literally how much stress hormone is pumping in the system and how much is not. And there's a subcortical, you cannot feel it process involved with this. Maybe, can somebody write this down for me to talk about it on another episode? About just subcortical stress in general and what that even means. And then the question is why? Like why? Oh, let me talk about one more thing. Connection to God.
Okay.
I think this is super important.
Yeah.
So the frontal cortex is responsible for faith, for hope, for optimism.
Right.
So when we're working with people and they tell me in their progressive vows, and we know this to be true, people write in their progressive vow, one of the biggest changes is I hear God's voice more clearly.
So cool.
Why would that be?
So positive stress, negative stress,
Yep.
no matter what, can create the same physiological symptoms in your body,
Yep, exactly.
no matter their circumstances.
Yeah. So this is why it's keenly aware to be super hyper aware of the thoughts that we think and the words that we speak. Because if I'm saying, again, back to if I'm sick and I'm broken and I'm hurt and I'm messed up
Identifying
and I'm
with that,
jacked up
yeah.
all the time,
Right.
I'm triggering my body's physiology to express that. And if I'm not, if I change my words, if I'm healthy, if I'm expressing health, if I'm vital, if I'm alive, if I'm strong,
Yes.
if my body's doing what God designed it to do, then my physiology is literally organizing itself around that.
Right.
And this is how stress affects the brain and affects all of our life outcomes. And 95% of it is the thoughts that we think.
Crazy.
Yeah, pretty cool. All right, fam. We love you guys. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.